Hello universe, I'll be showing you how to use the speedometer material, and I'll be showing you how to use it within another project that I'm selling called Blazing Race Template. So you might see some nodes that you don't have in the final product, but don't worry, this widget can be used solely on its own. Now, let's start from the top. This is our speed input. It goes from 0 to 1. 0 being our minimum value, as well as the minimum angle for both our needle and our fill meter. And 1 is the maximum angle the needle can go, and as well as the fill gauge. This is being fed by the widget that's housing our speedometer. There's nothing special going on in a speedometer. You can just drag and drop an image and set the texture to be the image to be the material speedometer here. And for my demonstration, I've set it to 1024 by 1024 just because I need it to be really big for debugging. And that's it. After that, you'll want to set although all of this is already set in the example widgets that you'll be provided, the speed input is being fed by either the kilometers per hour or miles per hour, if depending on which one you pick, and that is then normalized into 0 and 1, which drives the speedometer. Understood? Great. The next thing to cover is our fill 2. What is that? Well, fill 2 is our second fill meter, which is driven by default by our RPM input, which is also being fed in the widget right down here, and it gets our max rotation speed and our engine rotation speed and normalizes it between 0 and 1. Great. So in our speedometer, we can define things like the color of our fill, our second fill, and make it blue or whatever. But for now, we're going to disable it because it's not necessary for now. The next thing we can enable is our second needle. This is needle 2, and you can find needle 2 parameters down here. If we enable this and make needle 2 an RPM needle, you can see it now. This one is driven by RPM, and the other one is driven by speed. So if we enable this and enable fill 2, you have 2 needles and fill doing different things. I'm going to disable both of them for now. The next thing we can change is our gauge texture. You can make it anything you like, from the big simple gauges to the more complex gauges. And for the sake of exploring all the options we have, I'm going to use this gauge. And I'm going to change our needle texture into something else. Oh, and that was needle 2. This is the one I wanted to change. There we go. If we're setting up a smaller gauge, we can open up these options and look at our gauge here. This gauge is for kilometers per hour, so I'll make sure that in my game settings I set it to kilometers. Then I want to move this needle all the way down here. We can enable the X and Y position and move them as we like. And I feel like that's a good spot, but it's too big. We can now enable needle scale and increase the value to reduce the size and move it about to get our perfect sitting position. That's great. Now we want to calibrate the starting angle and end angle. To do this correctly, make sure you have its speed input, which is the current driving input. Make it 0, and then enable start angle and adjust to wherever 0 should be. Then scale it all the way to 1 and adjust the end angle like so. Now if we go from 0 to 1, the needle moves accordingly. For now, I can disable the radial fill just because it's not needed for our current testing. Play. You can see it's a bit incorrect because I have just now noticed I forgot to set our minimum and maximum value for the gauge. If we go back to our speedometer, you see min gauge value, and our minimum gauge value here is 20. And our maximum value is 220. Now it should be a lot more accurate when we're playing the game. Let's play. Now it shouldn't move until we get to 20. And now if you compare the digital value you see below and the gauge, it's a lot more accurate. 140, and let me boost a bit, 200, and so on and so forth. Perfect. That's how you set up one gauge. What if you have two and you want to set up the second one? Here's how to do that. First, we enable needle 2. There it is. And we're going to change the texture to a blue needle as well. And do the exact same thing we did for the first one. So I'm just going to fast forward through this. All done. Now the only difference between this needle 2 and the first one is which input is driving which. You see, the first one is not driven by RPM, it's driven by speed. The second one, I enabled RPM. That way, it's driven by the RPM input. Now, we can just save and play. You can see it is responding to the RPM of our car. And it works perfectly. The next thing we want to try out is the fill gauges. Let me enable radial fill. This is our first one, and there's a lot going on here as well. This is driven by speed by default. However, you can also change it so that it responds to RPM. So for this example, I'm going to be using RPM. And there are lots of options here to design, to change the sharpness of the gauge, meter, of the fill. And here we can change things like the color. Default color is white. Or you can change it to whatever. We'll leave it at white. You can also change the radius and thickness. But right now, what we want to change is the size. So we'll go for fill scale and scale it all the way down to something that fits here. And we can change the X and Y position as well. and make it so that the top fits neatly around the edge. I'm not going to make it pixel perfect, just to save time on this video. That's good enough. We can change the starting angle here in fill start angle and move it all the way like so. That's good. Then, oh no, I didn't calibrate it properly because that's not the end. There we go. So we move RPM to the max value, and now we can change the end angle with fill end angle. And there it is. So now 0 to 1, 0 to 1. It matches. You might have noticed that the value of the color value changes depending on where we are. This is another variable called fill end. And by default, it's enabled, called use end color. And what this means is that it uses another color. It blends our current white into red depending on our values set. So for example, the minimum end zone starts at 0.5. If which is where it starts blending into red, but that's too far. So let's increase it a bit so that it happens much sooner. Reduce it a bit. So at this point, it will be start blending. As for the end zone, which is where we want the material to be fully red, I'm going to increase this to 1, and I want it to be fully red at this point. So I'm just going to reduce the value of our max end until it becomes fully red. Good, I like that. Now we can go 0, and it starts blending into fully red. I can make it so that it stays white up until this point, because right now it's very pinkish, and I don't want that. So I can increase the min value and be like, I still want it to be white here. So, but at the same time, it still goes red over here. So you can adjust when it goes into the second color. If you don't want to use it at all, you can just disable and it will stay the same color throughout. All right, let's test this. You can see the RPM fill meter is changing colors to red. And that's how you set up a fill. You can also set up a second one by enabling fill 2. And you basically set it up the exact same way we set up the other one. Let's make its default value blue. And let's make it a speed input instead. All done. I've set up the second one the same way we set up the first one, and I'm going to save, minimize, and play. Now we have our gauges all set up with custom colors and custom needles and all that. A question you might be asking what if I need more than just 2 of these? I need another needle for temperature or for fuel. Here's how to set that up quickly. Go to the material and copy needle 2, right? And this is just an example. Copy it and paste it here. And you want to name all these variables as 3. needle 3, needle 3. This is so that it doesn't confusingly use the same values as the other needles here. And here is where we drive our input. You can then create your own custom inputs like fuel or health that goes from 0 to 1 and plug that here somewhere. So for now, I'm just going to use an example of 0.4, and I'm going to enable my second needle so that we can see it and give it a custom value of 0.3. There it is. So those are 2 needles, so we can see how the third one is enabled. So here you can change this to enable needle 3, but I'm not going to do that because I need it to be true and I don't need to change that. If you go all the way down here, introduce a new lerp. You can right click and search for linear interpolate. That's what this is. So you plug this into A just before it adds radial fill and plug this down to add. Plug the B value into needle 3 and also plug it into the alpha value. Then get the alpha of needle 3 and bring it all the way down and say add. And you want to add it to this set of opacities. And that's how you get your third needle. Once you've made all these parameters into their own third needle, you can customize them however you see fit, just like I taught you earlier. Same thing applies to radial fill. You do the exact same thing which is even easier here because all you'd have to do is press add radial fill 3 to B. Here you would add radial fill 3 just before the next node here because they all converge to the alpha here and the fill here. Wonderful, we're all done. That's how to use the material speedometer.
The one and only